Hello everyone, welcome to Diplomatic Briefing. According to a Reuters report on June 27, as Chinese rare earth magnets begin to circulate in exports, the threat of large-scale shutdowns across the entire automotive supply chain is fading. Nils Poel, head of market affairs at the European Association of Automotive Suppliers, confirmed that European suppliers have obtained enough permits, thus avoiding the widespread production disruptions that had been predicted earlier this month. Poel told Reuters that the speed of permit issuance by the Chinese side is accelerating, having increased from 25% to 60%, though there are still several hundred permits pending approval. He also added that if the end user is located in the United States, or if the products are transshipped through third countries such as India, the approval process takes longer or may not receive priority handling. Poel said that overall, they will likely be able to maintain production in July, and the impact is manageable. At present, they have already managed to avoid the possibility of large-scale production stoppages. Compared to European companies, whose supply issues have eased, American companies continue to complain. For example, Ford Motor Company in the US has been voicing its grievances endlessly. According to a Reuters report on June 28, several Ford factories in the United States have temporarily shut down over the past 3 weeks due to a shortage of rare earth magnets. Ford CEO Jim Farley said at a forum on the 27th that the current situation shows it is necessary to establish a domestic supply chain for key automotive components in the United States. He claimed that China's newly established export approval procedures for rare earth magnets have slowed down the supply of rare earths. Farley said at the forum, "Without China, we can't buy any high-power magnets. Because we have no way to obtain high-power magnets, we've had to shut down production at some factories over the past 3 weeks." Farley pointed out that these magnets are crucial for car seats, windshield wipers, doors, and audio systems. He said, "Right now, we just can't do these things." Farley also said that although China is approving rare earth export licenses, his company is still facing difficulties in obtaining rare earth materials. According to reports, rare earth magnets have become a hot topic in China-US trade negotiations. These coveted key raw materials are deeply embedded in products like cars, iPhones, and military equipment. At present, China is using its dominant position in this field to exert influence in trade negotiations. In April this year, after US President Trump imposed extremely high tariffs on China, the Chinese side quickly responded with countermeasures, including export controls on a range of critical minerals and rare earth magnets. According to data cited by the Wall Street Journal, after April, the supply of magnets to Western companies plummeted, impacting global manufacturers of automobiles, defense, and electronic products. In May, exports of rare earth magnets to the United States dropped by 93% year-on-year. Previously, industry insiders revealed that China is establishing an export licensing system. As the effects of the controls became apparent, Western companies began teaming up with the media to hype up the so-called weaponization of rare earths, attempting to launch a public opinion campaign against China, targeting the rare earth export licensing system established by the Chinese side. Previously, American companies like Ford have repeatedly complained in public, lamenting the so-called rare earth shortage and grumbling about not having enough rare earths to use. On June 13, Farley said in an interview with Bloomberg that the supply of these critical materials has been slowly trickling out of China. China has already implemented a new approval process for rare earth exports, which has further slowed down the supply chain. Now, it's being calculated on a daily basis. He said, "We're currently stretched thin, so we've had to shut down factories." According to reports, Ford's Explorer SUV plant in Chicago was shut down for a week last month. On June 23, a senior executive at Ford said that their company is still facing difficulties in obtaining the key magnets made from rare earth elements. Lisa Drake, Ford's vice president of battery and electric vehicle industrial planning, described the situation as just barely enough to get by, meaning that you have to constantly make emergency adjustments to the supply chain. According to a Wall Street Journal report on the 26th, recently quite a few Western companies have accused the Chinese side of deliberately delaying approval processes, causing them to wait for several weeks. Some companies have also complained that the magnets they receive are barely enough, some applications are rejected, and the future supply situation is hard to predict. In response, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already made it clear that the export control measures introduced by China are in line with international practices, are non-discriminatory, and are not targeted at any specific country. In mid-June, China had already stated that it had, in accordance with the law, approved a certain number of compliant rare earth export applications. To sum up a few observations, first, American companies are complaining today, otherwise they want to paint China as the bad guy, accusing China of weaponizing rare earths. But what can't be denied is that this time China's countermeasures have really hit American companies hard. The claims about production stoppages are not exaggerated. Second, this is just a case of tit for tat. While Ford is complaining bitterly today, have they ever considered that the US government is also comprehensively blocking Chinese companies like Huawei, and their government is still restricting the sale of high-end chips to China? Chinese companies are also facing extremely tough situations. It seems that today, American companies are finally getting a taste of this firsthand. Third, China's intention is not to decouple from the US or the global supply chain, but rather to make the US clearly recognize China's strengthened position, and to warn the US not to recklessly start a trade war. That's why China has recently begun to ease restrictions on rare earth exports. Of course, it's also clear in this process that China does indeed need to keep using these tools to counter US bullying, which is why Western analysts believe that China's rare earth approval system will be implemented permanently. Facing the predicament of American companies, Trump has no choice but to bow his head and negotiate with China. At the same time, however, he continues to threaten other economies to put pressure on China. As the negotiation deadline between the US and other major economies approaches, US officials have recently stated that they are stepping up negotiations with the relevant economies, and there is hope that trade agreements can be reached with some countries before the 90-day suspension period for reciprocal tariffs ends on July 9. For countries that fail to reach an agreement, the US may unilaterally set tariff rates. On the evening of the 28th, China's Ministry of Commerce responded by stating that since April this year, the United States has imposed so-called reciprocal tariffs on global trading partners, which is a typical act of unilateral bullying, seriously impacting the multilateral trading system and severely undermining the normal order of international trade. China has always firmly opposed this. Practice has proven that only by steadfastly defending principled positions can one truly safeguard their own legitimate rights and interests. The spokesperson said that China is pleased to see all parties resolve economic and trade differences with the United States through equal consultations. At the same time, China also calls on all parties to always stand on the side of fairness and justice, to stand on the right side of history, and to resolutely defend international trade rules and the multilateral trading system. The spokesperson also emphasized that China firmly opposes any party reaching a deal at the expense of China's interests in exchange for so-called tariff reductions. If such a situation arises, China will never accept it and will resolutely take countermeasures to safeguard its legitimate rights and interests. The most important part of the Ministry of Commerce's statement is the final section, which serves as a warning, especially directed at those economies that intend to sacrifice China's interests in exchange for the United States reducing some tariffs. It seems that there really are some economies planning to do this. China's statement carries a sense of being prepared for such eventualities. In addition, amid the China-US rivalry, how should small and medium-sized countries position themselves? On June 25, Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong attended the 16th Summer Davos Forum in Tianjin and delivered the opening speech. He called for building a more resilient and inclusive multilateral system, advocated for new rules centered on digital trade as the foundation for global cooperation, and proposed adopting flexible multilateralism to address the challenges of economic nationalism and deglobalization. Su Liping, an Asia-Pacific affairs expert and researcher at the Institute of Asia-Pacific and Global Strategy of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, explained to Mainland Observer that the current global trends of rising trade protectionism, intensifying geopolitical tensions, and the regionalization of supply chains pose severe challenges to Singapore's open economy, which relies on global connectivity. At the same time, these trends present unprecedented tests for the multilateral trade system centered on the series of rules established by the World Trade Organization, WTO. After concluding his visit to China, Lawrence Wong commented on the issue of the U.S.-China tariff war, stating that with intensifying geopolitical competition, more and more countries are weaponizing economic interdependence under the pretext of safeguarding national security, using choke points as leverage for exerting pressure. However, he pointed out that this approach will prompt the affected countries to seek alternative solutions, ultimately rendering the original leverage ineffective. Su Liping believes that this phenomenon actually reflects the existing injustices within the current international economic system. Lawrence Wong's remarks represent the widespread concerns of small and medium-sized countries like Singapore. The politicization of economic measures is frequently disrupting the stability of global industrial and supply chains, not only driving up trade and production costs, but also severely undermining the momentum of global economic growth. However, Su Liping pointed out that such statements cannot be generalized or oversimplified. He said the key lies in clarifying the causes and responsibilities behind these incidents, and in clearly identifying who is actively provoking friction and who is the real source and instigator of the problem. This is crucial for truly resolving the issue. Mainland scholars have specifically responded to the remarks made by Singaporean leaders. It is evident that when Lawrence Wong mentioned choke points being used as leverage, he was also expressing dissatisfaction with China's rare earth approval system. China finds it necessary to make it clear to the outside world that its measures are merely countermeasures forced upon it, and that people should not forget who started it all, nor should they try to shift the blame onto China. This also shows that the future international situation will remain complex and ever-changing. Even countries that cannot openly stand with China will say what suits their audience, talking one way to people and another way to others. The external risks China faces are still turbulent and dangerous, and Hong Kong will inevitably be affected as well, so we must always stay alert.